They packed up my life into a single suitcase. 68 years of memories compressed into one bag, then left me at the entrance of Sunset Gardens like I was yesterday's trash. But what they didn't know was this: I wasn't broken. I was watching, calculating, and I would get everything back on my own terms. That was the day I realized my children no longer saw me as their mother, but as an obstacle, not a person with a past or a heart or dreams, just an old woman who was in the way of something they wanted. It started with a phone call from my oldest son, Matthew. "Mom, we're coming by this morning to help you sort through a few things," he said, voice smooth, too smooth, like honey masking vinegar. I should have known then. I should have heard the danger beneath the politeness. But instead, I made coffee cake, the kind Harold's mother used to make. I set out their favorite mugs: Matthew's University of Michigan cup, Diane's World's Best Lawyer mug, Michael's old chipped ceramic one from his high school pottery class. I lit a candle. I tidied the house, even though it was already spotless. At 71, I still had my routines. I was still sharp, still independent. I didn't need help. I needed company. My house on Maple Street had been mine for nearly 4 decades. Harold and I bought it with sweat and sacrifice, back when our pockets were empty, but our dreams were full. We raised 3 children under that roof. We celebrated birthdays, mourned losses, patched scraped knees, and hosted Sunday dinners. And after Harold died 12 years ago now, the house became more than a home. It was my sanctuary, my last connection to the love of my life. That morning, I sat in the kitchen, the same place I'd nursed fevers and baked pies waiting for my children. I still remember the sound of the front door creaking open. Matthew came in first, suit pressed, eyes cold, all business. Diane followed, all crisp edges and clipped tones, her designer handbag clutched like armor. Michael came last, holding a folder that made my stomach twist. When I offered them warm coffee cake, they declined. Instead, Diane used that tone, that syrupy, sing-song tone people reserve for toddlers and the elderly, and said, "We've been talking, Mom." My hands went still. That phrase always comes before something awful, doesn't it? She said they'd found a wonderful place for me, a community, Sunset Gardens, she called it, like it was a vacation resort instead of what it truly was, a soft prison for the unwanted. They told me they'd already signed the papers, that they were selling the house, my house, the one Harold and I had paid off 30 years ago, the one they'd grown up in. I tried to protest. I pleaded. I reminded them of everything I still did on my own, how I had help for the yard work, how I used a cleaning service once a month, how I wasn't a burden. But they didn't hear me because they didn't come to help. They came to erase me. I wasn't even allowed to say goodbye. Within 2 hours, they'd packed up my essentials as if 68 years of life could be reduced to a couple of blouses, some pills, and a family photo I hadn't even chosen. They didn't let me go through my drawers, didn't let me touch the china cabinet Harold and I had bought on our 10th anniversary, or gather the letters he'd written me when we were still dating. It all happened so fast, I didn't realize until we were halfway down Maple Street that I hadn't even grabbed my wedding ring from the nightstand. I tried to speak, to ask them to stop, to turn around, to give me a moment, but the words dried up in my throat. Matthew drove. Diane sat beside him, tapping away on her phone. Michael rode in the back with me, glancing occasionally in my direction, but never quite meeting my eyes. As we pulled away, I turned my head to look back at the house, my home. The roses I'd just planted were in bloom yellow ones, like the ones Harold used to bring home after payday. The porch swing swayed gently in the breeze, empty now. The pencil marks by the kitchen door where we'd tracked the kids' heights year after year would probably be painted over by the next owner, erased like I never existed. We passed the grocery store where Mr. Miller always saved me the best peaches, St. Mark's, where Harold and I were married, where we baptized our babies, where we said goodbye to him. We passed the park where I pushed my kids on the swings. And later, my grandkids. The streets were familiar, intimate, but they might as well have been a different country now, because I wasn't going home. When we pulled up to Sunset Gardens, my stomach twisted. The place looked cheerful enough on the outside flower beds, a little stone path leading to the entrance, but it felt off, too bright, too clean, the kind of clean that covers up sadness, not joy. There was a laminated sign out front that read, "Where golden years truly shine." I wanted to rip it down. A woman named Tiffany greeted us inside, young, smiling, clipboard in hand. Her name tag read Activities Coordinator, and she chirped something about bingo nights and meatloaf Tuesdays. I barely heard her. They led me down a hallway with beige walls, past residents in wheelchairs staring blankly at the TV. One woman was crying softly in her room. Another was arguing with a nurse about whether she'd taken her pills. This wasn't a home. This was where people came to wait for the end. Room 207, that was mine. A twin bed, a dresser, a nightstand, a tiny bathroom with plastic grab bars and a dull mirror. The window faced the parking lot. My view was of minivans and sedans, of goodbyes and deliveries. I stood there, blinking in the artificial light, while my children unpacked the few things they deemed worthy of bringing. Matthew set up a cheap flip phone with only 3 numbers programmed in. Diane hung a few outfits in the miniature closet. Michael placed my toiletries on the sink, lined up like I was some exhibit in a museum. They were efficient, polite, cold. When they hugged me goodbye, their arms felt stiff, rehearsed. Diane said, "We'll visit soon," but her tone was hollow. Michael looked like he wanted to say something more, but he didn't. Matthew glanced at his watch again. Then the door clicked shut behind them. A soft click, but it sounded like a prison lock to me. I sat on the bed for a long time, not moving. The walls were too quiet, the air too still. I could still smell Harold's cologne in my memory, still see his boots by the door, hear his deep chuckle when I burned the toast. All of that gone, because my children decided I no longer belonged in my own life. That night, I didn't cry loud. Just a slow, silent leak of grief into the pillow. Not for the uncomfortable bed or the tasteless dinner, but for everything I'd lost. I cried for my rose garden, for my kitchen, where I'd baked pies from scratch, for the creaky third stair that Harold had always promised to fix, but never did. I cried because the people I gave my life to, the ones I protected, sacrificed for, raised with trembling hands and sleepless nights, they had chosen money over memories. And they didn't even look back. The grief didn't break me all at once. It was quieter than that, more private, like water dripping slowly through a crack in the ceiling, steady, persistent, and impossible to ignore. That first night in Sunset Gardens, I didn't scream. I didn't throw things or beg to go home. I just laid there, staring at the ceiling of room 207, and let the weight of it all press down on my chest until I could hardly breathe. I didn't cry for the bed I was in. I cried for the bed I wasn't in, the one Harold and I shared for 38 years. I cried for the warmth of his arms, for the smell of his cologne, for the way he'd always tuck the covers around my feet on cold nights. I cried for my garden, for the yellow roses I had just planted that I'd never see bloom, for the tomato vines I'd trained to climb the trellis, for the morning glories that always reached toward the sun. I cried because I was no longer a woman in her own home. I was a case number, a resident, a line on a clipboard. And most of all, I cried because my own children, my flesh and blood, had done this to me, coldly, methodically, as if I were a burden to be offloaded, as if my memories were disposable, my life negotiable. But I didn't stay broken, not forever. It took 2 weeks, 14 days of chewing on tasteless meals and pretending to be interested in mind games meant to ward off cognitive decline. I knew my mind was still sharp. I just had no one to talk to who believed me. The nurses were kind but distant. The aides meant well, but they treated me like I was already halfway gone. On the 15th morning, I woke up with a thought that sliced through the fog like sunlight through a curtain. Enough tears, enough waiting for someone to come rescue me. No one was coming, so I began to watch. The staff, I noticed, was stretched thin, but mostly kind. Letitia, the young nursing assistant who always asked how my night was. She had gentle hands and a tired smile. Raj, the night supervisor, snuck cookies to residents who couldn't sleep. And Marcus, the janitor, whistled old jazz tunes while he cleaned, like he was dancing through the halls of a much happier place. I started watching the other residents, too. Some were resigned faces dull, spirits dulled even more. Others were still fighting in their own quiet ways. There was Mrs. Chin in 210, who did Tai Chi every morning behind the building. Mr. Gonzalez in 215 read Pablo Neruda aloud to anyone who'd listen. And the woman in 203, I didn't know her name yet, but I heard her cry every night for a husband who, I imagined, had loved her fiercely once. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, I met Irene. I'd wandered into the common room looking for a distraction. She was sitting at a table, playing solitaire with ferocity, cursing under her breath when the cards refused to cooperate. Her silver hair was cut short in a stylish bob, and she wore a red cardigan and enough turquoise jewelry to make a cowboy blush. "You've got that my ungrateful kids dumped me here look," she said, without even glancing up from her game. I blinked. "Is it that obvious?" She cracked a smile. "Honey, I've seen that look in the mirror for 3 years." I sat down, and for the first time since I'd arrived, I laughed. Not just a chuckle, a real, belly-deep laugh. And it felt like breathing after being underwater for too long. That's how it began. Irene pulled me into her orbit like a planet around the sun. She was 77, a retired literature professor, and she did not believe in self-pity. "If you're gonna cry," she said, "at least do it while you're planning your escape." She introduced me to Eleanor, a retired accountant with arthritis in her knees and a brain sharper than a guillotine. Then came Vivian, a civil rights lawyer turned stroke survivor who used a walker but spoke with the fire of someone who had marched through history and wasn't done fighting yet. They were like no one I'd ever known. And somehow they saw me. Not just an old woman in room 207, not just a mother who'd been discarded. They saw Marie, the woman who once ran a PTA with military precision, the woman who raised 3 children and paid off a mortgage on beans and coupons, the woman who could still quote Shakespeare, still sew a quilt without missing a stitch, still memorize every birthday and anniversary in her head. We started meeting every day, first for meals, then for walks around the grounds, and eventually, late at night in Irene's room over cups of red wine poured from mouthwash bottles. Marcus's wife works at a liquor store, Irene explained with a wink. We've got our sources. And one night, as the moonlight streamed through a sliver in the curtains, I told them everything. About the house, about the power of attorney I'd signed after surgery groggy, trusting, vulnerable, about how they'd sold the idea of Sunset Gardens to me like it was a gift, when it was really a lock without a key. Vivian's expression darkened. Eleanor leaned forward. Irene swore under her breath. Bastards, Irene said. No offense. None taken. I replied. They are bastards. That night, something shifted in me. I wasn't alone anymore. And I wasn't done. Not even close. Barbara and I had been friends for over 30 years. We raised our kids in the same neighborhood, shared recipes, took turns driving to church. I knew if there was one person I could trust, it was her. So the next morning, after a late-night strategy session with Irene, Eleanor, and Vivian over watered-down Merlot in mouthwash bottles, I walked down to the community phone by the front desk. I knew they monitored calls, so I kept my voice light. Barbara, I said, forcing a chuckle. I forgot a few things at the house, some old photos and papers. Would you mind picking them up for me? Her voice tightened just enough for me to know she understood. Of course. Marie, I'll bring them by tomorrow after our book club meeting. We didn't have a book club. That was our signal. I gave her precise instructions, where to find the filing cabinet in Harold's old office, where I thought the deed was, and the drawer in my bedside table, where Michael had left the copy of The Power of Attorney after my surgery. I spent the next 3 days pretending to be just another helpless old woman. I went to the bingo game, smiled politely during crafts, let the nurses think I was adjusting. And all the while, I waited. When Barbara called back, she used another code. Marie, she said, her tone bright. About the book club, there's a meeting at your place next week. It's all there. What she meant was she'd found the documents. The next evening, during bingo night, when the staff was distracted and most residents were shuffled into the activity room, Barbara arrived. She carried a large handbag and a smile. The receptionist barely looked up. Just another well-dressed woman visiting another forgotten elder. We met in my room, doors shut, curtains drawn. She pulled out a manila folder and laid the contents across my bedspread like a dealer laying down her cards. I reached for the deed first. My name. Still on it. Sole ownership. Next, the power of attorney document. Eleanor put on her reading glasses, scanned it slowly. Then again, her brow furrowed, then lifted. This is it, she said. It's limited to healthcare decisions only. No financial authority. They had no legal right to sell that house. A breath I didn't know I'd been holding escaped my lips. Vivian took the paper next, eyes narrowing. And they had you sign this after surgery. I nodded. I was still foggy from anesthesia. Michael said it was just in case something went wrong during recovery. Vivian's lips tightened. That's ethically questionable at best. Legally, we might have something here. That night, we didn't just drink wine. We started planning a revolution. Vivian reached out to a former law partner of hers, a man named Martin Green. Said he owed her a favor from way back, within 2 days. He agreed to represent me pro bono, if what you're telling me is accurate. He said during our first call, we'll get an injunction to stop the sale immediately. Eleanor contacted her old bank manager, helped me set up new accounts, and transfer what I had left before my kids could touch it. I still had Harold's pension, a good amount in savings, and my Social Security. Not a fortune, but enough to start over. Irene, meanwhile, coached me. They expect you to be weak, she said. Give it to them. Act confused. Forget things. Be the woman they think they dumped here. So I did. When Diane called, I was sweet, compliant. I told her I loved the place, that the nurses were nice, that I was so glad they made the decision for me. When Matthew visited, I asked what day it was 3 times in 20 minutes. He left smiling. He thought I was fading. He thought he'd won. But while he polished his spreadsheets and plotted his sale, I was getting stronger. Martin filed the injunction just in time. The court froze the sale until it could verify the legitimacy of the power of attorney. When I explained how I'd signed the document while drugged post-surgery, the judge wasn't pleased. We'll be contesting that signature, Martin told me after the hearing, and I'll be filing to revoke their power entirely. By the end of that week, I had new bank accounts, a lawyer, and a growing fire in my belly I hadn't felt in years. And best of all, I had allies. Not the kind bound by blood, but the kind who show up when you're drowning and help you build a boat. Vivian, Eleanor, Irene, Barbara, my new family. We sat in Irene's room late that Friday, feet up, wine in hand, laughing about the absurdity of it all. They thought they were burying you, Irene said, raising her cup, but they didn't know you were a seed. I looked around at the women who'd pulled me from the ashes. No, I said, smiling, but they're about to find out. When Martin called to tell me the judge had ruled in our favor, I sat on the edge of my twin bed in room 207, holding the phone with both hands like it was made of porcelain. They can't sell the house, he said, and their power of attorney is now restricted to emergency medical decisions only. I closed my eyes, let the words sink in like rain after a drought. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe. The home Harold and I had built where we raised 3 children. Where I lived a whole lifetime, it was still mine. But I wasn't free yet, because they still believed I was tucked away, powerless and pliant. And if they realized I'd fought back, they might come for more. Vivian had warned me, if they catch wind of what you're doing, they might try to petition for guardianship, claim you're incompetent, unsafe, unable to care for yourself. So we had to move fast and quiet. It was Irene who came up with the plan. We slip out during the annual family weekend, she said, laying out a printed schedule like she was orchestrating a heist. The staff will be distracted. Visitors will be everywhere. No one will notice if 4 little old ladies take a stroll and never come back. Eleanor calculated the costs. We'll need about $50,000 to get established. First and last month's rent, furniture, medical care cushion, travel, emergency buffer. I have more than enough. I said, between the house, my savings, Harold's pension, we're covered. I looked around the small room, the pale blue walls, the nightstand where I'd kept the photo Diane had chosen for me, the window that looked out on a parking lot, and felt something shift in me. I wasn't scared anymore. I was ready. The Thursday before family weekend, I received a call from Diane. Mom, we're not going to make it this year, she said breezily. Matthew has a conference. Michael's got the kids, and I have a charity gala. We'll come visit another time. I bit my tongue to keep from laughing. They had no idea what they'd just gifted me. That Friday night, Barbara pulled up behind the building in her SUV. The 4 of us, me, Irene, Eleanor, and Vivian, walked out through the service entrance just as the sky turned lavender with dusk. Each of us had a single suitcase. No fuss, no fanfare. Marcus, the night janitor, held the door open with his mop cart and said, "Good luck. Ladies." We told him we were going on a weekend retreat. He didn't ask questions, but the smile on his face told me he knew. He approved. We drove straight to the airport. 4 one-way tickets to Santa Fe waited under Barbara's name. The gate agent didn't even blink, just scanned our IDs and pointed us toward the jet bridge. As the plane lifted off, I looked down through the window at the city lights below. Somewhere down there, my children were going about their lives, thinking they'd locked me away, thinking their inconvenient mother had been silenced. Let them think it. They had no idea what was coming. Santa Fe welcomed us with warm air and open sky. We rented a small adobe-style house for the month, enough space for 4 bedrooms, a kitchen full of light, and a walled garden out back where I swore I'd plant roses again. Vivian and Eleanor shared the master with the walk-in shower for their arthritis. Irene claimed the room with the best light for reading. I took the smallest one with a view of the mountains. It reminded me of the guest room in our old house, the one I'd sewn quilts in for years. That first morning, I stood barefoot in the courtyard with my coffee and just breathed. No nurses, no beeping call buttons, no laminated activity schedules on the wall, just the sun, the earth, and a future that finally belonged to me again. I'm ready to sell the house. I told Martin that afternoon. He didn't ask where I was or why. Good lawyers don't. He just said, I'll file the paperwork. Market's hot. You should get multiple offers. He was right. Within days, we had 5 offers, all over asking price. One of them was $75,000 higher cash. Quick close. Accept it, I said without hesitation. But of course, my children tried to interfere. Martin called again. They're trying to block the sale, claiming you're not of sound mind. I smiled. That's why we had that neurologist evaluation last month, isn't it? He chuckled. Already sent it. They've got no leg to stand on. Matthew called the next morning. His voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the panic underneath. Mother, he said, this is dangerous behavior. You're not thinking clearly. I didn't say a word. Just listened. Let him hear the silence. Diane left a voicemail threatening to call the police. Michael pleaded, saying the facility was billing them now and they were legally responsible. I listened to every message with calm. Let them sweat. Let them feel a fraction of the fear they'd inflicted on me. 2 weeks later, the sale closed. $875,000. After taxes and Martin's fees, I had over $800,000, more than I ever imagined having in my entire life. But it wasn't about the money. It was about the control, the dignity, the victory. And I wasn't done yet. 2 weeks after the house sold, I sat at the small wooden desk in my sunlit room and took out the heaviest paper I owned, cream-colored, thick, textured, the kind Harold and I used to write thank you notes on after the holidays. I addressed 3 identical letters, each in careful cursive: Matthew Wilson, Diane Carrington, Michael Wilson. Not emails, not phone calls, letters, formal, final. This was not a plea for understanding. This was a reckoning. Dear Matthew, Diane, and Michael, by now you are aware that I am no longer at Sunset Gardens. What you may not know is that I sold the family home legally with full mental competence, as certified by Dr. Elaine Levine. I write not to explain, as explanations are owed only to those who show respect. Instead, I write to inform you of the consequences. The proceeds from the house, $875,000, have been placed in an irrevocable trust. None of this money will ever be available to you. Instead, it will fund the Marie Wilson Foundation for Elder Autonomy, which will provide legal aid to seniors exploited by their own families. You thought I was too old to understand what you were doing, too fragile to fight back, too confused to recognize betrayal. You were wrong on all counts. Do not attempt to contact me again. Any legal challenge will be met with immediate countersuit for attempted financial exploitation of an elder. You chose money over your mother. I choose dignity over false family ties. Marie Wilson. I signed each one with a steady hand, then folded them, sealed them in envelopes, and sent them via courier signature confirmation required. I didn't include a return address. Let them wonder. Let them stew in their silence and shame. The very next morning, I walked with Irene to the downtown district in Santa Fe. We stepped into a small vacant storefront with chipped yellow paint and dusty windows. It had good bones, a wide front room, 2 small offices in the back, a tiny kitchen that smelled faintly of cinnamon and hope. This is it, I whispered. 3 weeks later, that storefront became the home of the Marie Wilson Foundation for Elder Autonomy. We painted the walls bright sunshine yellow, no more beige, Irene insisted, and filled every corner with potted plants. Vivian brought in local artwork. Eleanor set up the books, folders, and files in alphabetical perfection. We hung a sign by the front door that read, "You are not alone." We started small, support groups, legal consultations, phone hotlines. Within 3 months, we'd helped 15 seniors stop unlawful evictions, freeze stolen accounts, and reclaim stolen property. One woman, Martha Jenkins, had been tricked by her daughter into signing over the deed to their family farm in Iowa. With our help, she got her land back and the daughter got served papers. Another case, Richard Devo, a retired history professor whose nephew had emptied his accounts while posing as his caregiver. We not only recovered his savings, we pressed charges. The nephew now faced real consequences. And Richard, he volunteers at our office now, helping others write their own victim statements. Every win stitched another tear in my heart. Every survivor reminded me why I was still here. But the real turning point came when a young woman walked into the office one morning. Sharp navy suit, eyes full of fire. "My name is Sofia Rodriguez." She said, "I want to work here." She was 32, a lawyer, Stanford graduate. Her grandmother, she told us, had been quietly placed in a nursing home and stripped of her home and rights before she passed. They told her she had nowhere else to go, she said, her voice shaking. She believed them. We hired her on the spot, and with Sophia's help, we expanded quickly. Within a year, we had satellite offices in Phoenix and Denver. We launched a national guide for seniors called Protecting Your Independence, mailed to every senior center in 5 states, 1 year to the day after I was abandoned at Sunset Gardens. I stood behind a podium in Washington, D.C., speaking at a national conference on elder rights. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't quiver. They thought they were writing my last chapter. I said, what they didn't know is this was only the beginning. From the back of the room, I spotted a familiar face. Michael, standing quietly, clapping, tears running down his cheeks. I acknowledged him with a small nod, but I didn't invite him to the reception. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt, and that's okay, because in the end, I didn't need my old family to find peace. I had my new one, Irene, Eleanor, Vivian, Sophia, the clients, the volunteers, the seniors who walked through our door and left with their dignity intact, in a little adobe house with thick white walls and flowering vines. I planted a new rose garden. It bloomed fast in the desert sun, much like me. And when I sat in the courtyard each morning with my coffee, toes warm against the clay tiles, I no longer thought of what I'd lost. I thought of what I'd built, and I smiled. Somewhere along the way, We stopped surviving and started living. The foundation was growing faster than I ever imagined. We opened new offices in Phoenix and Denver. Calls came in from all over the country, from sons, daughters, neighbors, church groups wanting to help, wanting to warn, wanting to fight. And every case we took, every elder we helped reclaim a home, freeze a stolen account, or push back against legal manipulation, stitched another piece of my heart back together. We weren't just healing others, we were healing ourselves. But life, as it tends to, brought moments of quiet reckoning. It was a Wednesday morning in early spring when my phone buzzed with an email notification. The sender's name stopped me cold. Emily Wilson, my granddaughter. The subject line was simple. Can we talk? I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Grandma, we didn't know what they did to you. Dad told us you needed more care and that you agreed. But when your foundation was featured in the news last month, Jason and I started looking into it. We saw your name. We saw what you built. We're so sorry. We miss you. We want to see you, if you're willing. Emily and Jason. My hands trembled as I read it again. I hadn't spoken to either of them since the day I was dropped at Sunset Gardens. Emily was 20 now, a social work student at the University of Oregon. Jason, 18, had just started studying environmental science. I used to bake cookies with them on Saturdays. I used to tuck them in when their parents went on vacation. They used to draw me birthday cards in crayon, and now they were old enough to write their own emails. I waited a day before responding, not out of spite, but caution. I had built a life where I felt safe again, strong again. I couldn't risk letting that be undone. But my heart, stubborn as ever, whispered something different. I finally replied, lunch, Santa Fe, spring break, one meeting. We'll see. They came the second week of March. We met at a little cafe near the plaza, terracotta tiles, blue-painted trim, the scent of roasted green chilies floating on the breeze. When I saw them walking toward me, I nearly lost my breath. They looked so much like their father, but softer, kinder. Jason carried a small book on native plants. Emily clutched her phone like a security blanket. They were nervous. I was too. Grandma, Emily whispered, almost afraid to say it aloud. I nodded once, and she stepped forward and hugged me. Then Jason followed. We didn't talk about their parents. We didn't have to. Instead, we talked about their classes, their hopes, their plans. I told them about the garden, about the foundation, about my 3 roommates turned family and the wine and mouthwash bottles. They laughed. They listened. And most of all, they looked at me not with pity, not with confusion, but with something I hadn't seen in a long time. Admiration. Before they left. Emily reached across the table and took my hand. We want to be part of your life, if you'll let us. I didn't promise anything, but I gave her hand a gentle squeeze. We'll start slow. I said, emails, a visit or 2. We'll see where it goes. And that's how it began. A year passed. Then 2. The foundation expanded into 12 states. We helped over 1,000 seniors fight back. We published guides. We ran national campaigns. I was interviewed by NPR. People magazine featured our story under the headline, The Grandmother Who Fought Back and Won. But none of it compared to the quiet Sundays in my garden. Irene passed away in her sleep that second winter, peacefully, gently. We scattered her ashes beneath the desert roses she loved so dearly. I placed her turquoise rings on the shelf above my writing desk, beside a photo of her laughing during our Grand Canyon trip. The house felt quieter without her, but never empty. Her spirit filled every corner. Eleanor and Vivian stayed close. We took weekend trips to Taos, road trip through Arizona, saw the autumn leaves in Vermont. When Eleanor's arthritis grew worse, we got her a wheelchair with off-road tires and called it the Cadillac. Vivian, now 83, hosted Sunday teas with the grace of royalty. On my 72nd birthday, I received a package from Diane. Inside was my mother's pearl necklace. No note, just the necklace, carefully wrapped. I held it in my hands, let the cool weight of it settle against my skin. It didn't fix anything, but it meant something. That night, I wore the pearls to an award ceremony in Washington, Dean T.C., where the National Elder Rights Coalition presented me with a Lifetime Achievement Award. As I stood at the podium, I looked out at the crowd lawyers, advocates, survivors, seniors, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, complete. When my children put me in that facility, I said they thought they were closing the final chapter of my story. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, is that they were giving me the first sentence of my most powerful one. The applause went on for 5 full minutes, and I just stood there, smiling, because they thought they buried me. But they didn't know I was a seed. Some people leave behind wealth. Others leave behind a name on a building or a photo in a dusty frame. But me, I wanted to leave behind dignity. Not just mine, but dignity for the countless others who'd been discarded, silenced, ignored. That's why I founded the Marie Wilson Foundation for Elder Autonomy. It started in a little adobe house in Santa Fe, with yellow walls and a dream held together by 4 women who'd been told their best years were behind them. And now it spans 12 states. We've helped over 1,000 seniors reclaim their homes, their accounts, their identities. We've changed elder rights legislation in 3 states. We've published guides, run a national hotline, partnered with law schools to train the next generation of advocates. We turned our pain into power, but even the strongest voices eventually grow quiet. Eleanor passed away last spring. She went in her sleep, her mind still sharp, her finances still in perfect order. At her memorial, we didn't wear black. We wore lavender, her favorite color. I spoke at her service and said, Eleanor taught us how to plan for life. And in doing so, she helped us prepare for death with grace, clarity, and courage. We scattered her ashes beside Irene's, beneath the desert roses that bloom outside our foundation office. Their spirits live on in every corner of that place, in every legal brief, every intake call, every rose petal. Vivian still joins me for Sunday tea. Her walk is slower now, her voice a bit thinner, but her wisdom, still a lighthouse on stormy nights. I didn't think I'd have a second act, she told me recently as we sipped Earl Grey on my porch, let alone a third. I laughed. Honey, we're writing the whole trilogy. The house I live in now isn't grand, but it's mine. The walls are adobe. The ceilings have wooden vigas. Harold would have loved. There's a little kitchen where I bake apple pies with cinnamon crusts. And there's a small room I've turned into a writing nook where I sit with a cup of coffee and let the sun spill through the window while I reflect on the life I almost lost and the one I built in its place. I still wear the pearl necklace Diane returned to me, not out of forgiveness, but out of remembrance of who I was before they tried to erase me, of the woman I became when I decided I wasn't going down without a fight. I didn't reconnect with my children. I didn't need to, but I did make space in my life for Emily and Jason. They visit 3 times a year now, spring break, summer, and the holidays. We never speak of their parents. That's an unspoken agreement. We focus on school, work, relationships, on the future, not the pain of the past. Emily graduated with her master's in social work and now interns with our foundation's outreach team. Jason is pursuing a PhD in environmental studies and helped us design a sustainable garden behind our office. They're good people, not because of where they came from, but in spite of it. I'm proud of them. And that, I've realized, is enough. On my 75th birthday, they threw me a surprise party at the foundation's headquarters. Vivian coordinated the guest list. Sophia, our director, brought in catered tamales and peach cobbler. The staff decorated the front office with roses and handmade signs. As I walked in, everyone clapped. They sang happy birthday. And in that moment, surrounded by the people who'd stood by me, the lives we'd changed, the mission we'd built, I felt full. Full in a way I hadn't since Harold stood in our kitchen with flour on his apron and kissed my forehead just because he could. They handed me a plaque to Marie Wilson, champion of dignity, defender of the forgotten, seed of change. I cried, not out of sadness, but because somehow, despite everything being abandoned, betrayed, dismissed, I had grown something that would outlive me. A year later, I published a memoir titled Second Blooming. It detailed not only what my children did to me, but how I found strength in the darkest corner of my life. It was a love letter to every senior who thought their story was over. The book went viral among women over 60. At readings, I met grandmothers who hugged me like a sister, widows who brought yellow roses, veterans who'd spent years in silence. They told me, I found my voice because of you. I always told them, you had it all along. You just forgot where you put it. Last fall, I was invited to speak at a national elder law conference again. I stood at the podium, older now, a little slower on the stairs, but stronger than I'd ever been. I was once the woman left in a beige room. I told them, alone, forgotten. My life whittled down to a suitcase and a signature, but what they didn't realize was I wasn't fading. I was germinating. And look at me now. I'm in full bloom. They gave me a standing ovation. Michael was there again. He didn't try to approach me. He just watched, hands in his lap, eyes misted with something between guilt and awe. I didn't wave, but I didn't look away either. Forgiveness, I've learned, is not always a door you open for someone else. Sometimes it's a gate you close behind you. Now, as I sit in the courtyard of my home, the roses blooming wild around me, I think often of the woman I was 5 years ago, trembling in room 207, wondering if anyone would ever see her again. I see her now. She was afraid, but brave. She was hurt, but unbroken. She was buried, but not dead. And oh, how she bloomed. The desert taught me something I never learned in all my years back east. It taught me that even in the driest places where nothing seems to grow, where the sun bleaches the bones of what came before, something beautiful can still take root and bloom. That's what I became in Santa Fe. Not just someone who survived betrayal, not just a woman who outsmarted her children and reclaimed her life. I became someone new entirely, someone I actually liked, every morning. I sit in my small courtyard with a cup of coffee, listening to the fountain trickle and watching the light creep up over the adobe walls. The roses I planted after Irene's passing are in full bloom, deep red, golden yellow, lavender like Eleanor used to wear. Each one is a reminder of something we built together, and yet life didn't stop just because I won. It kept unfolding, changing, like the seasons we sometimes forget still turn, even when we feel stuck. Jason and Emily kept writing, visiting. They never pressured, never asked for too much, just showed up with soft smiles and open hands. They became more than grandchildren. They became bridges, gentle ones, unburdened by old expectations, full of possibility. One afternoon, after helping me replant the herb garden, Emily sat beside me and said, "You know, Grandma, I didn't realize how much strength could come from stillness." She was talking about the way I'd handled it all, not with screaming or slamming doors, but with action, with clarity. "I thought I had to shout to be heard," she said. "You only need to whisper." I told her, "If what you're saying carries truth." Jason nodded quietly, hands still dusted with soil. "We didn't deserve to find you again," he said, "but I'm glad we did." So was I. And though I still haven't reconnected with their parents, I no longer carry the weight of that like I once did. Some doors stay closed. That doesn't mean the hallway can't still lead somewhere bright. I hosted Thanksgiving last year, a new tradition. No turkey carved by a grumbling son-in-law who never thanked me. No grand declarations over a table I set alone. This time, it was a potluck. Emily made sweet potato casserole from a recipe Vivian gave her. Jason brought local wine and a wildflower bouquet. Sophia, our foundation director, showed up with a tray of tamales and her baby girl strapped to her chest in a sling. We set up tables outside under the wide New Mexico sky. The sun dipped behind the mountains in a wash of amber and indigo. A breeze carried the scent of roasting chilies and cinnamon. We laughed. We shared stories. We passed plates and refilled glasses and toasted to things we'd once believed were behind us. "We're the lucky ones," Vivian whispered as we watched everyone mingle. "We figured it out before it was too late." I thought it was too late, I admitted. She looked at me over the rim of her tea. "That's because you were looking backward. You started living the moment you looked forward." That night, after everyone had gone, I sat on the porch long after dark, wrapped in Harold's old flannel blanket, staring at the stars. I thought about what my life used to be centered around others, structured by service. I'd been a mother, a wife, a caretaker, a homemaker. I had given and waited for someone to say, "You've done enough. Now rest." But no one ever said it, because I never said it to myself. Now, I no longer wait for permission to live. I travel with Vivian twice a year, once by train, once by plane. We've seen the redwoods in California, the jazz clubs in New Orleans, the quiet beauty of Lake Michigan in the fall. We joke that we're collecting states like kids collect baseball cards. I still work part-time at the foundation, mostly mentoring, speaking, writing our quarterly letters. I have a voice, and I use it, not to hurt, but to teach, to remind others that life isn't done until you are, and sometimes, not even then. This year, we helped our 2000th senior. His name was Henry. He was 84 and had been pushed into a nursing home after his daughter sold his lake house without telling him. With our help, he won it back. He sent us a postcard of the house 2 months later. It said, "Back on my porch, coffee in hand. Thanks for helping me come home." I cried when I read it, because that's what we all want, isn't it? Not just a house, not just justice. We want to come home, to ourselves, to who we used to be, to who we still might become. Sometimes, I think about the day I left Sunset Gardens, that soft click of the door behind me, the suitcase in my hand, the fear clamped around my ribs like a vice. And now, years later, I sit in a house filled with laughter. I walk through gardens I planted myself. I see photos of the people who never gave up on me, who gave me permission to bloom. So if you're hearing this, wherever you are, if you're sitting alone, wondering if your story's over, wondering if anyone sees you, hears you, needs you, I'm here to tell you it's not over, not even close. They said I was too old to start again. I proved them wrong, not with revenge, but with roses. On my 76th birthday, I sat alone in the garden behind my Santa Fe home, sunlight warming my knees, coffee cooling slowly in my hand. My roses were blooming, stubborn and radiant, just like the women who had helped me start over. Irene, Eleanor, Vivian. They weren't just friends. They were my lifeboat when the ship sank. And somehow, through heartbreak and betrayal, we'd built a new life. I still hear from Emily and Jason. They visit often now, bringing stories from their studies, hopes about their future. We never talk about their parents. That silence has become a kind of peace. The foundation lives on. We've helped thousands, changed laws, changed lives. But the real triumph wasn't in the headlines. It was in the quiet moments, the gentle thank you from a woman who got her home back, the tears of a veteran who reclaimed his pension, the laughter of friends who refused to be forgotten. They left me in that facility thinking my story was over. But that wasn't the end. It was the start of my greatest chapter. Sometimes it takes losing everything to find yourself. No matter your age, your voice still matters. You still matter. If you've ever felt invisible, unheard, or underestimated, know this: you are not alone, and your story isn't finished. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of courage, second chances, and the power of starting again.